Hey, it's Brett, and welcome or welcome back to another episode of Behind the Stack, where today I am sitting down with author Charlotte McConaghy to discuss her new book, Wild Dark Shore. A little bit about Charlotte. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller Once There Were Wolves, which was the winner of the Indie Book Award for Fiction in 2022 and is currently being developed for television, and the international bestseller Migrations, a Time Magazine Best Book of the Year and the Amazon.com Best Fiction of the Year for 2020, which is translated into more than 20 languages and is being adapted for film. She has both a graduate degree in screenwriting and a master's degree in screen arts and lives in Sydney with her partner and two children. So, enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. I am just so, I can't even tell you how happy I am to have Charlotte McConaghy here today. First of all, I read this book early enough that I feel like I went crazy and I was like, I have to have you on. I had to talk to you about this. And then for other reasons that I'll explain as we get into the book. But your new book, Wild Dark Shore, it is so fantastic. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's heartbreaking and breathtaking. So congratulations. It's really, really, really wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here to chat with you today.
So I'd love to ask you, first of all, do you have, and I'm sure you're starting to gear up for this, do you have an elevator pitch for the book?
I will try. I'll let's give it a go.
It could be a tall building too, so don't worry. It doesn't have to be like, two stories.
So the book is about Dominic Salt and his three children, who are the caretakers of a very small remote island out down near Antarctica. They're alone on this island because it's become very dangerous and uninhabitable due to rising sea levels. So they're sort of packing up to leave until one night during a terrible storm, a woman washes ashore, and she's a very mysterious figure. They don't know why she's there or how she got there. And her name's Rowan, she also starts to realize that the Salts are keeping secrets from her. So it's a bit of a I'd say a gothic romantic mystery with it explores, I think, the interconnectedness of all living things, but also looks at how far we're sort of willing to go for the people we love.
That was excellent.
Text.
And very concise. Is it too punny to ask you what was the seed of the story for you?
Not at all. It's excellent. So it sort of started I would say there were two seeds. The very first seed was, so this is a little nugget of story that finds its way into the book. The youngest son, Orly, tells the stories of seeds, and one of them is the story of the Wallamai pine, which is an Australian tree that is extremely old. It's ancient. We call it the dinosaur trees, and for millions of years we thought it was extinct. And then randomly, during the 90s, someone just stumbled across this secret grove of them in a forest. And it was really kind of extraordinary because it was like they had come back to life straight out of the dinosaur period. And it's been kept secret where they are. You can't go and look at them. They've been sort of withheld from the public to keep them safe. And then recently, during the horrific wildfires that we had here, the fires were approaching these, incredibly precious, rare trees. And it was all over the news at the time. These kind of amazing emergency fighters came down from helicopters, like they were winched down into the forest and had to set up this kind of protective perimeter to save these trees from the fires. And this whole story was just kind of extraordinary to me, the idea of how far we will go and what are the things that we're willing to save. And so I sort of had this idea of, I wanted to use that somehow. And I started to think about plants, biodiversity. And then I read the story of the Global Seed Vault in Svalbard, which is set up as the world's backup for all the humanity's food sources. All the seeds are up there in case we ever need them after some terrible emergency. And this vault is meant to survive, you know, hundreds of years into the future to protect us. But the one thing that they hadn't kind of prepared for was melting permafrost. And the whole tunnel to this vault started flooding. And so that just kind of gave me this whole idea. I really wanted to write about a seed vault that was flooding. And I ended up deciding not to set the book on Svalbard because there was no way I would ever be able to get there. It was right when in the middle of COVID, this idea was happening. So I needed to figure out where I could put it. And then I discovered this. Well, I had known about Macquarie Island for a while, but I looked into it and it was just kind of perfect. All of a sudden, there's this incredible island down halfway between Tasmania and Antarctica, and it's an extraordinary place. And so I decided to base my island on Macquarie. I fictionalized it because I needed to put the seed vault there. And yeah, it kind of just went from there.
And didn't you, in terms of research, didn't you go for a while with your family to Macquarie Island?
I did, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, if you can explain for our listeners and viewers, I did a deep dive on it when I was like, researching this and also just when I finished the book. But if you could just talk about that and the diversity of kind of the mammals, the birds on the island, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So, yes. So my partner and I realized I was writing this book and it was just, I was struggling because I really needed to see it. I needed to experience this island. And so I looked into it and there was one boat that was headed there at the end of the year. You get one opportunity to go. And so even though we had a 1-year-old at the time, I knew this would be my only chance to go before the book was due. So we just decided to go for it. I contacted the boat and asked them if it was within the realm of possibility to take a baby on what could be potentially a very perilous journey. And they said they'd never done it before, but if I was willing to do it, then they were willing to do it. And wow. So it was genuinely terrifying. I wondered many times if I was, making a terrible mistake and taking him down there because it's very remote and there's nobody to get home. You can't just leave the boat if things go awry. If it was truly terrible, we could potentially get a helicopter down there to evacuate us out. But, that's a big deal. Anyway.
It's not like an Uber.
No, absolutely not. Luckily, everything went wonderfully. There was no dramas. It was amazing weather. We had an incredible time. Macquarie is truly like nowhere else on this planet. I will never see anything like it again. You step off onto black sand and there are elephant seals next to your feet. There's penguins that waddle up to say hello. There was a giant petrel that kind of like flew down over our heads and then landed in the ocean right next to us. There's albatross flying around. It's just an incredible place. It's full of just really kind of untouched wildlife. But the thing about Macquarie is that, in fact, it almost was completely destroyed by the oil trade back in the 1800s. So it has a really kind of very sad, grim history of oil exploitation, and they nearly wiped out the whole seal population, most of the penguins. And so you can actually sort of feel that when you go onto the island. It's incredibly beautiful, but it also has this feeling of being very haunted. And that's something that I would not have known had I not gone there and taken the effort to go there. And so that kind of really ended up inspiring the feel of the novel.
Wow. Where did you guys stay? Like, where did they house you when you went?
So you can't stay on the island. You have to stay on the boat, and you just do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it's completely uninhabited except for one. There's a science base. And so there's only about 20 people on the base, I believe, at a time. And they were completely closed to us because of COVID. They couldn't have any outside coming to sort of see them. They had to protect their little tiny population. So we were just there. And and you can only kind of go for a few days. Like they don't allow sort of long visits, and you've got to be really careful about, you can't take anything onto the island. You've got to scrub your boots before and after so you're not bringing on any kind of contaminants to the environment. Yeah, it's
Wow.
one. Yeah.
And so, okay, so then you had your place, you had your idea, and then how did you build the idea for, well, for starters, this family? What was your impetus with them? I mean, let's like talk about them really quick. You know, we talked about Dominic and he's widowed,
Yes.
which we know at the start, and he has three children. Orly, who you've spoken about already, is the youngest, who's very bookish and kind of obsessed with the seeds and the trees and the whole wildlife. And then there's Fen, who's the middle child, 17. And she's, at least the start of this, really the only girl on the island.
Yep.
And then there's Raf. Is that how we pronounce his name?
Yeah,
The
right.
oldest. And so I wondered too, how did you start to construct this family? And I also wondered, in regards to these three kids, was there something specific that you wanted these three kids to be representative of in your writing, or a greater role? I mean, Orly clearly has a very distinct role in the book, but I wasn't sure about the other two.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, so Raf, I think, is, look, I think the idea about this family is that they're a family who are kind of deeply wounded by the loss of their mother. They all carry that loss in different ways. They have different kind of levels of trauma around it. But they are all certainly kind of clinging to this memory of her. Dominic is, I mean, he literally sees her ghost. He's haunted by, not, because of the way in which she died, he has a lot of unresolved trauma around that. Raf, I think, really holds on his mother as well. He's got a lot of rage that he doesn't really know how to manage. He just punches a punching bag because it's what his dad's told him to do. He hasn't been taught how to kind of express his emotions or his feelings. He's got other losses too that are more recent on the island, and I really loved for him that he is naturally very gifted with music. So he loves to play the violin, and specifically loves trying to make whale song out of the violin. So that's kind of a really creative outlet for him. He goes out looking for whales and to try and record the whale song. And then, yeah, as you said, there's Fan, who's also struggling with being, a young woman who's trying to become herself on this very isolated island with nobody her own age. She actually now lives with the seals. She's left the lighthouse that her family stay in, and she goes and she spends a lot of time down on the beach with the seals. She kind of loves being in the water. I think that's also a bit of a response to particular traumas and wounds that she's carrying, fears. In terms of what they represent, I don't know, I wanted them to be a family that, I think deep down beneath all the kind of struggles that they have, they needed to be deeply loving and bonded with each other. I really wanted them to be a family who just kind of adore each other, and needed to kind of grapple with their differences beyond that as a starting place.
Sure.
But really struggling with not being able to communicate and not knowing how to kind of manage their various traumas and wounds, with a father who doesn't know how to talk about anything. So Rowan's really a catalyst for them. No, I like to map them all out. I have pictures of them, and I try to think about how they kind of fit into a bigger picture, and how they kind of will work together, and what they will bring to the story, and what dynamics they might bring.
And do you have when you said pictures, do you have visualizations of each of them and what you think they would look like?
Yeah, I like to choose faces, actors that I think might kind of have the essence. It's when I can kind of imagine them with bodies as people.
Yes.
Sometimes it brings little textural details that you wouldn't otherwise be able to come up with.
100%.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too as a reader sometimes because you read these characters and you have ideas of these characters. Sometimes I'll read and it's so descriptive, and this was one of these circumstances. I can't always get the face
Yeah.
necessarily. Isn't that interesting?
I never
But
see.
I could get, yeah, but I get the rest of it. I get the body, I get the way it moves, I hear that voice. And I have to tell you that I happen to listen to this as well. And first of all, it's an incredibly well done book on tape.
Hey,
Have you heard it at all?
I've heard little bits of it. I haven't sat and listened to the whole thing because I feel too embarrassed.
Really?
Not by them; they're amazing. Yeah,
Yes.
amazing. But by my own writing, there's something about it that I just find a little bit freaky.
That's interesting. So beyond, are you someone that, you'll do your rewrites, you get your edits, you go through the process, but once it's done and you're like, put it away?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll be reading out, you know, bits of this many times to come. Um, but yeah, it will probably be a little while before I'll be able to pick it up and just start reading because I live in terror that I've like left in something bad or like badly written, or I'll see a mistake or
I know. Well, Ann Patchett talks about that when she had, she just put out this annotated version of Bel Canto. And a lot of it is her going through and saying, like, this was horrible. Like, why did I write that?
oh my God, I
So,
love that.
so I don't think you're alone, but it's also like you hear a lot of actors will not watch the performance once it's
Yeah,
finished. They're in it, but they'll like, I think it would be personally excruciating to sit through a premiere of a movie or something
I
with
agree.
all those people and sharing it, especially when you've been so vulnerable. And it's much
Yeah.
like writing. You are sharing something and it's a very vulnerable thing you've done. And suddenly it's like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas
Um,
if you give it enough time, like I can kind of look back at Migrations now and read it, and not that I've sat down and read the whole thing, but I can kind of pick up, pages of it, and it's separate enough from me now that it doesn't even feel like me on the page. It's kind of an interesting
sure.
experience.
You get away from it enough.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting, I think, for you one day if your son chooses to read your
Yeah.
stuff and
Yeah.
his impression. But to tell you anyway, the audiobook is wonderful, and all of the actors are fantastic. And there's a man named Cooper Mortlock who in particular who reads Dominic, and it's so evocative, and it's really
Great.
great. So anyway, it's really wonderful.
Yeah, great.
Um,
So nice to hear.
um, so let's talk a little bit about Rowan, because first of all, I loved all these characters, but I found her so interesting, and she to me so much is the heart of this book. And like you talked about earlier in terms of being a catalyst, and I think she's a catalyst for all of them in
Yeah.
terms of what she opens up in each of them. So can you talk about her a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I wanted her to be. I sort of had this feeling like there's no point to the story if she doesn't come and change all of their lives in some way, in a meaningful way. So Rowan she's a very, I would say she's a very practical, capable, handy person. She's a builder by trade, and I really, really liked in some ways, I really liked kind of inverting the, I guess, stereotypical gender roles of Dominic, and
Mm.
I kind of swapped them a little bit in some elements. She's lived through a lot, I guess, in her life, and she has some kind of old wounds that she's trying to recover from, and I think they inform how she sort of um, relates to the world now. She's been through, and this is, I don't think this is really a spoiler. She's recently lost her house to a fire, and this is a house that she spent her whole life building herself with her own hands, and so it's a profound loss to her. And it's sort of left her feeling very jaded and pessimistic about the world and what's to come, and she's given up hoping for anything, about anything. She's very protective of herself in terms of her relationships. She decided a long time ago that she wouldn't have children because she doesn't want to live in a world where she may not be able to keep them safe. And I think that's a really heartbreaking decision that a lot of people are thinking about these days in terms of our climate crisis and whether or not we do bring children into it. So I sort of wanted her to be a voice for that concern, while also taking her through a journey of, I guess, discovering that at the end of the world, love should grow instead of shrink, and that that kind of love can be worth the risk.
Do you, how do I phrase this? Do you find yourself, uh, let me rephrase it and say this. I imagined that much of her mindset in certain ways is Charlotte's mindset in certain ways in regards to climate. Um, is that true?
Yeah, I think she's probably the side of me that's most pessimistic. I move between the two versions of myself. I move between feeling very depressed about the whole thing and like it is just all going downhill, and and then I kind of swing back to no, we need to have purpose around this and we can't give up yet. So I think, yeah, feeling like our responsibility to the planet is, we need to live as well as we can with as positive an impact as we can. So thinking about what that means for our life choices, definitely, I think about those things for sure. I do have children though. I that one for me was not negotiable. I've always known to have children, but it concerns me all these things that Rowan thinks about. I think about those things too. I think about what children mean to the planet and what dangers the planet will, inflict on my kids, and how I'm going to kind of prepare them for that, and what I need to teach them about loss and impermanence, and how do we talk to these kids about this?
And we're experiencing so much of this in this accelerating real time.
Yeah.
I was reading this while the fires in Los Angeles happened. And I was driving from LA with my daughter. We were going to the desert to get out of Los Angeles. And it wasn't that our home in particular was in direct line with where the fires were headed. However, it was so smoky and the kind of everything that was happening, and you've been through that. And so I did want to read this one really quick passage because I thought, and it's talking about what you've already brought up with Rowan losing her home, but it so affected me because you captured something so beautifully that I think is hard to really convey to people the magnitude of it. Bear with me one second while I try to get my glasses on over my over my earphones. But she says here, I cry for the forest, for the trees and the shrubs, and for all who lived within it. So many species, so many creatures I'd come down here to look for each day and delight in the glimpses I caught. I cry for my life here in this little patch of paradise, for the safety I felt, for the woman I was while living here. I fed the magpies each evening in this spot. I waited for the passage of Mother Wombat and her baby ambling slowly by. Her burrow was here somewhere. I stopped crying and stand to look, unsure why I would do this to myself. Any remains I might find will only make it worse. But I lift the sheet of tin and rest it against the burned husk of a tree. I can see the opening of the burrow in the earth. I get down on my knees, then onto my stomach, pressing my whole body flat into the ash, and I look. It's just that image and that whole scene reminded me so much of watching these people showing back up to what was left of their homes and their neighborhoods. And, I had a very dear friend who texted me that second morning and said, we lost everything. This was the house that I raised our children in. This was the home. This is where our school was, that we walked our children to school every day, and the park that they played in every afternoon. And, she finished it with like, we'll move on. And it's also a testament in this book. It does too, because I think it all speaks to perseverance in the face of this incredible adversity that we're all entering into now.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, it's so heartbreaking, isn't it? But it's about, yeah, we just kind of have to keep going. There's no other choice now. It's everything will start to get harder. And yeah, we're gonna have to teach our kids how to keep going.
Yeah, and I do have the one thing I do have faith, despite what's happening in the US right now, which is so unreal.
Mm.
But, if we've learned anything, progress does move forward. And I just hope that too many things don't continue to spiral out of control before we can get um, some sort of righting of the ship and ahead of it,
Yeah.
because too many of us now know what's happening and see it firsthand.
Yeah. And the danger with exactly with going too far down the wrong path is that it becomes too emotionally difficult for us to figure out how to steer back the other way. And more of us will start to give up.
That's 100%. With all of your books, there is a very big kind of ecological connection, or a very much a connection with animals, and that they're many times what's happening to them as a result of us.
Yeah.
That's something that's obviously very important to you.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I don't know. I just feel incredibly sad when I think about the impact we're having on the other creatures on this planet. And I think a lot of the rhetoric around climate change and sort of slowing it down tends to be about how we're going to save ourselves. And I don't know. I suppose with my books, I like to try and decenter people a little bit and try to um, really look at what it what impact this is having on wildlife and plant life is big in Wild Duck Shore as
Yeah.
well. Just for their own sakes, rather than only a big idea about this book is what would we try and save if we had the chance? Would it only be things that could feed us and that would benefit us, or would we try to prioritize things that exist for their own sake? Um, I don't know what the answer would be. I know there's a lot of people out there fighting for biodiversity because everything is incredibly interconnected. So it all does matter, but just purely for its own sake, I like to think that we would make a choice to save, what we don't need.
There's a great scene in the book with a whale. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful scene. And it speaks to everything you're talking about right now. It's funny going back to the three kids in this book. I was talking to someone and I said, they're remarkably well adjusted for everything that they're facing and the incredible amounts of grief and the incredible isolation and the incredible sense of loneliness. But they really do, like, I really got through it and I was like, I'm shocked that one of them is not a serial killer after all this.
That's true. They're kind of miraculous in that way, aren't they?
Well, they are, but I also think it's like what you're talking about. It's really a testament to the family and to each other. Even separate from Dominic, they're finding a way to survive. And that gave me hope too, because I thought, here's a very good example of, pushed to extreme circumstances,
Yeah.
they really are coming together.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
thing. And I think also there's something about having to nurture somebody who's more vulnerable than you. So for them, well, for Raph and Fan and Dom, it's having to raise this little boy. They've got they bring him with them when he's one. So they've got a baby on this island that they have to look after, and they have to band together to do it. And I think there is something to be said for looking after something other than yourself, asking you to step up and just be okay within yourself for that little boy, for children. And that's what you have to do as parents. You've got to be okay for your kids.
coming back to climate change, and not to close this out on a down note at all, but do you feel at all optimistic? I mean, even writing these stories, do you feel optimistic, and you have children of your own, in terms of reconciling for this future for all of us?
Um, yeah, I do. I have to work hard at feeling optimistic, and I don't know if it's about that anymore for me. I think it's more about just getting on with it.
Yeah,
Um, Regardless of how I feel, we have to still be purposeful, about what we're doing, and we have to still make an effort. I think that's the main thing. And so hope helps with that because it can give us energy, gives us enough energy to kind of be galvanized for the fight. But uh, I'd be lying if I said I felt it all the time. I do. I swing between, emotions a lot. But I will keep trying and I will keep doing the best that I can, because it's not just about us, it's about all the generations to come. And it's about all our wild creatures and places
that's
that
right.
we haven't yet lost. We have to we kind of don't have the luxury of just being, of giving up, of just, losing hope. I don't think we've got that luxury.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I do think it's something that everyone has to really be, you know, conscious of. And I just am hopeful that for many people, it won't become too late before they realize what we've already lost. Well, thank you so much. These are, I will say, there are potentially there are very heavy themes in this book, and they are tempered with moments of levity. And there is, I almost don't want to say anything because I don't want to give too much, because I feel like part of the fun of this book is how it lays out. You do a shifting narrative that happens with all the characters, which I absolutely love. And I think it makes it incredibly propulsive. And so, everyone, get this book, Wild Dark Shore. It's really beautiful. It's so fantastic. And buy independent if you can. Charlotte, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. You're such a joy. And truly, I can't tell you how much I just love, love, love the book. So congratulations.